And joining me now is Democratic Congresswoman from California, Karen Bass. She's the former chair of the Congressional Black Caucus and is the point person for the ongoing talks on police reform. Congresswoman Bass, thank you so much for being with us today on, of course, what is another devastating day for two families and the communities that surround them. So let me just start with the status of these talks, because there's been some confusion about whether you are formally negotiating and talking to your counterparts in the Senate about this bill. Are these formal negotiations underway?
No, there are not formal negotiations underway, but I hope that that will start this week. And basically the difference between informal and formal is authority that would be granted to us by our leadership. And so I've spoken to Speaker Pelosi. I know that our counterparts, Senator Booker as well as Senator Scott, we are speaking to our leadership so that hopefully this week we can move from the informal to formal.
So what's the holdup? What's the holdup with leadership?
I don't think there is a holdup. I mean, I think that you will see it move this week. I mean, I think we needed to get to a certain place. I feel like we're there now. So I don't feel that certainly have been completely supported by Speaker Pelosi, and I believe that Senator Booker and Senator Scott have received their support as well. We just need to now have that become public with public statements by our leadership, which I think that you will see in the next day or so.
Okay, so let's talk about the content of the legislation itself. My colleague Leanne was just walking through some of the potential differences that you have here. And my question for you, is there a red line on any one of these particular issues? If, for example, the ban on chokeholds is not in the legislation, Democrats cannot support that. And if there are red lines like that, what are they?
No, well, first of all, I mean, you know that I'm not going to negotiate on TV, especially just one side.
I predicted you would say that.
I don't believe you can come to a negotiation and say, here, take it or leave it. I mean, that's just not the way it's done. I certainly have things that I want to see in the bill that, might be my internal red lines, but we have to see. But I mean, the bottom line is that we have to have transparency. We have to have accountability. And I think what's going on in North Carolina is a perfect example of what we cannot continue to do. That family, I know, was invited to view the video. They were prepared to do that. They had their counsel fly in from out of town, and then they get there and they're told they're not going to view it because we're going to redact things. I'm sorry, but that sends a horrible message to the community, regardless of what the state law is, that it has to be court ordered. They offered to show the video and then they reneged. And I'm very concerned that something like that can be very disruptive in the community. Those are the kind of things that we have to stop. We have to stop this culture of us versus them. And I believe that we can begin that through legislation, but so much more needs to be done beyond what the George Floyd Justice and Policing Bill will be able to do.
So, Congresswoman, do you think Democrats in the House are going to be willing to support something that doesn't go as far as the current George Floyd in Policing Act? I mean, you will have to compromise to some degree with Republicans on some of these questions to win their support. Where do you think the balance is right now in terms of saying, no, we shouldn't do anything because it's not good enough, and if it's not good enough, we simply can't support it, or saying, okay, we acknowledge that this compromise may not go as far as we want, but we absolutely need to do something? I mean, Democrats have often come down as saying, if it's not good enough, we're not going to do it. Where is your head, and where do you think the caucus is right now on that?
I think the caucus wants to see something done. I think America wants to see something done. I think those people that came out that maintained our majority, that helped Biden and Harris get the White House, want to see something done. So there is the current bill, but there are also things that the bill didn't do that I believe we can add in. For example, one of the big spots that we need to fill is over mental illness, mental health crises. And so putting resources in the Department of Health and Human Services so that people can respond, clinicians can, social workers can respond along with or without police to address crises. When people are in a crisis If you can treat them and make sure that they have proper health care ahead of time, you can actually prevent the crisis that results in people calling the police. And then, unfortunately, that ends in tragedy far more than I think is reasonable. So there are things that the bill doesn't do that I believe that we can add in.
Let me ask you, as we wrap up here, one of the most contentious pieces of this is this idea of qualified immunity and potentially stripping police officers of that qualified immunity. Do you think that what we've heard and the reporting around some of what Senator Scott's bringing to the table, this idea that the employer would have responsibility, does that go far enough for you in this question of qualified immunity?
For right now, it does not, because we want the officers to be held accountable too. But I am open to listening to what Senator Scott says. The point is that we have to find a way to hold officers accountable so they will stop shooting people. You know, for example, we need to spend a lot more time, resources, and emphasis on de-escalation training. Many officers I've talked to have said when they go through training, they spend very little time, a few hours, on de-escalation, but an awful lot of time on, of course, how to protect yourself, but when you shoot, that you shoot to kill. You don't shoot to wound. And so I think that there's a lot of issues that need to be taken up, but accountability is number one. So qualified immunity is one way for officers to be accountable, civically accountable if there's a civil lawsuit. And then also the willfulness that your reporter was describing before, whether it's where the officer intended to kill or whether his reckless behavior led to a death, or hers, such as with Dante Wright. I mean, how can you be on the police force for 26 years and mistake your taser for a gun? That's a situation where, well, if the officer received more training, how much more training do you need to know the difference? So I question the quality of training, but I also say that qualified immunity is about accountability. If Senator Scott has some other way to hold officers accountable, I'm all ears.
All right, Congresswoman Karen Bass, an illuminating conversation as always. Thanks very much for being with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.